Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
This week we're talking about John Constable's The Gleaners, and particular interest to Laura and I because it is set in Brighton, which is where we both live and where we're recording this from. It was painted in 1824, so almost exactly, 197 years ago. And we'll talk about its location in a second, but I can see the Downs from my window where we're recording this. So this painting is done somewhere relatively local.
Yes. In actual fact, I think we should take a walk up there and have a look at this. Because I can't quite work out exactly where he's done it from.
Well.
Don't tell me. You've been exact spot.
No, you see. So just north of here, we have the Jack and Jill Windmills, don't we?
Yeah.
And you'd think, and in fact, when I saw this and we talked about it the other week, I said, oh, yeah, it looks like the Jack and Jill Windmills, which are just very close to where my brother lives, just up past Pycombe on the way to Hassocks. But you got to be a bit careful, haven't you? Because I started doing a bit of research and there was one windmill there, which predates this painting, but the other one was built afterwards.
Oh, how funny.
In fact, the Jill windmill was initially on Dyke Road, which is right here. I mean, literally, 300 metres from from the front door. And apparently there were 2 or 3 windmills on this road before it was all developed. And then it was moved, I guess as Brighton expanded, that particular windmill was moved up to where it now sits. And in fact, literally, if that house wasn't there, we would see the Patcham windmill.
Yes.
And that was the last windmill built in this area in 1851.
That's so interesting.
So I'm not entirely sure. The other thing about this is that when
we're all ready now.
So I don't know where it is, basically.
Okay. That's the end of that then, isn't it? We've done really well again.
But also, if you look on the right-hand side of the painting, there is a house there.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't quite work this out at all.
So, I don't know.
Also, I thought they were slightly closer together.
I mean, I'll tell you where it could be. I mean, to those of you listening, of course, the first thing I have to say is go to the 7th Art Productions website to look at the painting.
Yes.
Otherwise, as ever, this will seem a bit confusing. I think it's a wonderful painting, but it's an interesting painting because in an exhibition, in a gallery, you could just, that's quite nice, and walk past it. Actually, It's one of those paintings which there's so much to it that is absolutely fascinating. So we've started talking about its location. Okay, that's only one way of starting the discussion about a painting, but let's talk about the location. So, there's a windmill in Hangleton, which again is only 2 miles from here.
Yeah.
It is now completely surrounded by houses. But back in 1965, when I lived in Hangleton as a 1-year-old, Hangleton Windmill and Hangleton Manor, which were very close to it, were actually in fields. I mean, so it's only 40, 50... something... 20,
Why do we do this every time?
It's only 21 years ago. No, but it's only 50-odd years ago.
Yeah.
And now the windmill looks very strange because it is completely surrounded by houses. And probably if it wasn't kind of in a roundabout, it probably would have been knocked down. And, of course, bringing things right up to date, if you look off the coast of Brighton now, you've got all those wind turbines. So, there's a circularity there because back in the 19th century and earlier, I think they had windmills back in the 1700s. I'm sure they did. But of course, windmills, or in the Netherlands, water mills, were hugely important for grinding grain.
Yeah.
The staple diet was bread, and you had to grind grain. And so you had these types of windmills. You had something called a post windmill, which was basically, for those who used to watch Windy Miller, was that in Trumpton?
Oh, I love that.
Ah, no, wasn't that brilliant?
Yeah. No, I do love that.
So his windmill was probably a post mill because what they had to do there is they had to physically turn the whole windmill around to face the wind.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they were always in danger of being toppled over if they got it wrong. And then they had bigger windmills where you could move the engineering within it. What were they called? So you had a post windmill, which was just on a single post, which you turned. And then what were the other ones called? Can't remember now.
I don't know. I haven't read history.
But I recently, in fact, in Spain, not so long ago, was inside a hotel where they used to have this extraordinary amount of engineering to grind the olives to make olive oil. And it was so complicated. And this is just what's left of it.
Yeah. And that was all just inside a hotel.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the windmill, though.
Well, it's a hotel now.
Oh, okay.
But it was for production of olives, and
yeah.
So
go back to the painting.
To go back to the painting, I associate it with Jack and Jill, although I'm absolutely not sure. It could be what we now think of as Patcham. It could be Hangleton. Basically, even in Lewis, they've got a reconstructed windmill.
Yes. I think he might have made it up a little bit.
He could have made it up. Of course, that's always possible. What we do know is that John Constable lived in Brighton. And so living in Brighton, he would have walked from where he lived. He could have got a horse and carriage, but he probably would have walked with his easel. Or he certainly would have gone out and sketched and then come back and done it in his studio. And so somewhere within what I walk, 5, 6, 7 miles walking.
This is where he found himself.
Up on the Downs, he's found this.
When he was in Brighton, though, his wife wasn't very well, was she? That's why they came to Brighton.
Yeah.
So when you look at his other paintings, of the Suffolk ones, when he was a child, or the ones that sort of, represent his childhood, some of the Brighton ones do look slightly less happy. Is that a funny thing to say?
No.
Because, going back now to one of our original podcasts, I couldn't even remember the name, Haywain. And when you look at that painting, it's so detailed and stuff. This one doesn't look quite so detailed. Maybe he just wasn't in a great place.
Did we do the Haywain as a podcast?
No, but we were we had one of our moments where we couldn't remember the name of things.
Oh, yes.
And I think we were, which happens a fair bit. But now, of course, I've looked at it. And then I look at this one, I think, I don't know. Isn't it funny that he's painted those windmills from that angle? There's no real detail?
Well, taking what you've just said and bearing in mind there's rarely accidents in paintings, I'd have thought rather than the way he's depicted the windmills, it would be the clouds.
Yes.
Like today, he could easily have painted that as a beautiful blue sky, but he hasn't.
No.
He's painted, obviously he liked to paint clouds, and we'll talk about that.
He's got another one, I think, which was the storm in Brighton.
And he does that kind of, and those kind of paintings.
It's all clouds.
Those kind of paintings turn up actually more and more, and I think they do reflect his mood. So you get storm. We've got to be careful, haven't we? That he might have come out and that was the weather and he chose to paint it.
Yes.
On the other hand, it might have been reflecting his mood.
Yes. He doesn't seem to, all the artists that we've done, when you look at John Constable, he said himself, a really lovely childhood, idyllic. He seemed to have quite a nice sort of pleasant life. And the main thing that was really upsetting for him was when his wife was ill.
Yeah.
And then they came to Brighton, and then I'm not sure if she died in Brighton, but then she died, and that was when. So he was that was the thing that really affected him.
I think she dies back in Charlotte Street in London.
Okay.
4 years after this.
Okay. But when you think of some of the other artists that we do, and they have such turbulent lives, and this has happened and that's happened.
I mean, we should say that he's moved from Suffolk to London after a little bit of opposition, familial opposition. He does marry Maria, is that her name?
Yeah.
But she becomes ill with tuberculosis. So they decide that the best thing for her is sea air.
Yes.
Hence they come to Brighton. And Constable's a little bit dismissive, is that the right word? A little bit rude, critical of Brighton. He says that, on the seafront, when, it's like Piccadilly by the sea.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he said it's just London. Everyone comes down in their carriages and they scoff mussels by the sea. And, I don't think he found it as, bear in mind that he lived in London, but I think he found it a little bit, a bit like it is now at weekends.
I was going to say, I'm not sure it's changed.
With the hen and stag do's. No, well, London by the sea is the typical way of, it's a
Certainly
typical phrase, isn't it?
The weekends.
Yeah.
I mean, we go for a nice walk down there just because it's just mayhem some days, which is great. Good fun, good to watch.
But he does what I do, which is he goes north. He goes into the countryside for peace and quiet. So that part of the appeal of this picture is that this is, again, I don't know if it is the Jack and Jill Windmills, but that is a place I like to walk. I like to run, and given the choice between busy Brighton and slightly quieter South Downs, I'll go to the South Downs.
And I'll go to Brighton.
And you'll go to Brighton.
Although I do really love a Downs walk, in fairness.
We should explain that behind Brighton, so from the sea, going backwards about 5 kilometres, 3 miles, there is a range of hills which goes from Eastbourne all the way to Winchester, so east to west, about 97 miles, I think it is. And they're called the South Downs, or the South, basically. And so if this is the Jack and Jill pub, then actually the South Downs Way, which is the path you can take for that entire route, literally goes is within a few hundred metres of these windmills.
Yeah, and they're lovely. One is actually a house, isn't it? Someone's home.
Yeah, and one they do open from time to time, so you can and you can actually buy. I think you can actually buy flour from there. So the Gleaners, interesting, because if you let's have a look at the picture. So we've talked about the clouds. So the majority of this analyses painting. So the majority of the painting is clouds, and you can see that in some ways it's kind of sketchy. And you have a sense of a painter just exploring the craft of painting. If you look carefully, I think he has started with perhaps a blue sky and gradually covered it with white and grey and black. Now, frankly, if you were out and you saw clouds like that, you would make a beeline to go home because that's quite a storm coming.
Yeah.
And but I think for him, he's just, he loved to paint clouds. And
was that what he's actually known for? Painting clouds and skies?
I think more broadly, he's known for painting landscapes.
Okay.
But
and the countryside.
But the skies are part of that. But the bottom quarter or fifth are the fields. So these fields, we can tell from the title, the Gleaners, have recently been harvested. So this is an autumn view. Now the Gleaners were people who were allowed by the landowners to go into a field after it had been harvested and pick up the grain that was lying around. These Gleaners are referred to in the Bible. They are given kind of biblical justification for mopping up the grain that's lying on the on the soil.
And they take that home, do they? And
take it home.
Grind that with themselves, I imagine then.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Or they would pay the miller to do it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I remember in Afghanistan, this amazing water mill that I filmed in, and basically this thing hadn't changed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was just, but people would bring the grain from their own little field, their own little allotment.
Right.
He would grind it for them. So they'd give them all the grain, and then they'd get back a bag of beautiful white flour.
Right.
With a few bits and pieces in it. But he would keep 10% of the flour.
Okay.
That was his payment.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
I love things like that. I love stories like that.
Now, I can't tell whether that's two women or two young girls, or
No.
One is clearly bent over picking up some bits and pieces. The other one would appear to be holding a bag or something, or a basket into which they're putting the grain. I mean, a hell of a job. I mean, even harvesting was harvesting by hand was a rough old job. I mean, we've talked about this before, so much effort went into the food, and, harvesting was just hard, slog, slightly romanticised now when you think, the paintings where at the end of the day they're all having a glass of cider or dancing around, but...
It's funny this painting. I don't know. It intrigues me because there's just not. It's quite empty, isn't it? Even the Gleaners part. Would you not think there was be more Gleaners? So now I'm starting to really look at it. I'm thinking it's an amazing painting. There's not a lot to it really, but it is really lovely.
I guess if you were to, it's one of those things, isn't it? We've talked about this in the Monk. Imagine it without them.
Yes.
So if you put your thumb over it, it's a completely... That really does... If you don't have the two Gleaners, it really just feels like a sketch. Yeah. Almost like an art project. Okay, the two Gleaners obviously gives you a real focus. But imagine that little scene repeated over here. Yeah. Then it becomes really... It kind of falls apart, doesn't it? If you've got more people, it becomes very bitty. Whereas this, you've just got that line, the two, and I'm sure it's intentional that it's a little bit of a pyramid there. I mean, there's a kind of a line. Right. She's bending over, so you go from her to there, and you go along the crest to the other one. Yeah. Down the black and back along. I don't know, there's a bit of a circle there, elongated circle going round. I think these painters, whether deliberately or not, whether they're just part of their genius, they're always just making your eye go round and round and round.
Is it the National Gallery where there's a constable room?
The Tate.
Is it the Tate? Okay.
I don't know, actually. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, so I thought it was the National Gallery. And then I thought that nearby was obviously Turner, because they were quite often compared. They were the same time, weren't they?
They are often compared. And
I suppose everybody's $1 million question is, who do you prefer? Because Constable's very cosy, isn't he? You sort of put your slippers on, think, it's nice, and you can sort of sit back and relax. And Constable's maybe, but they are they are similar. But it's funny how with the Gleaners, there's just seemed such a lot, sort of lack of detail. And I just wonder if it was where he was in his life, maybe. But that's me now, trying to get all... I'm getting ahead of myself, Phil.
Well, there's a couple of things there. I mean...
No, I've gone.
I've just looked at
a different level now.
I've just looked at the National Gallery. So there's a Constable and Turner and Stubbs room.
Okay.
Room 34.
Right. That must be...
I mean, there's certainly obviously Constables and Turners at the Tate as well.
Have you seen the Gleaners in real life? Because the Haywain is quite big, isn't it?
Well, the 6-footers. Well, tell us about the 6-footers.
Well, I saw it was really, really big, and that I did not expect it to be that big. I think I need to go once again. Every time we're either going to eat food or go and visit an exhibition afterwards. So I just know that I didn't expect it to be that big when I started looking at the Hay Wain. But yeah, so I just wondered if you were given, could you answer the question of which one you liked more, Turner or Constable? I wonder if most people have an opinion.
Well, there is a late Constable exhibition on now, as it happens, at the Royal Academy, which thoroughly recommend. I haven't been. I'm going to go on the 2nd of December.
Oh, brilliant.
And there was recently a Tate Turner exhibition.
Right, yeah.
Who do I like? I always find it quite tricky when you ask to make a comparison. I mean, it kind of depends. I think that... I mean, both these artists are really important in the history of art for a number of reasons. But one reason, which is very interesting, is that in 1870, when the Franco-Prussian War was at its height, a lot of artists, or some significant French artists, came to London to escape the war. Mm-hmm. Among them, Monet. Mm-hmm. I believe Pissarro.
Yes, I have. Yes.
And the dealer came too, Paul Durand-Ruel. Mm-hmm. And they were staggered by the works of Constable and Turner and very influenced by it. So when we talk about the Impressionists and the revolutionary nature of their artwork and how they're trying to capture light, and it's not, it's sketchy and it's, impressionistic. Well, if we look at the Gleaners, that's not, in a sense, that's not realistic.
No.
And I think there's something slightly... Turner has, I don't know, maybe it's a bit more emotion in Turner.
Yeah.
Constable is, and maybe it's to do with their personalities and their lives. Constable, you can feel, is really thinking about what he's doing. And I'm sure Turner was too, but there's more, I don't know, perhaps there's just a bit more fire to Turner.
Yeah.
So I guess if I had to choose, I guess I would come down on the side of Turner. But I mean,
we could
in our ever-expanding living room, I'd have this on my wall.
Yeah, I was going to say, everyone's going to go crazy. It's funny, though, because he hasn't got a lot of well, I would think, doesn't look like it's really detailed. It is just, the sky is just made up of so many sort of like crazy brushstrokes. It's lovely.
I mean, it's a major painting and it's at the Tate, but it's probably not. I mean, it's not the Hay Wain or Flatford Mill or Leaping Horse or... I mean, those 6-footers are really interesting because he basically got these canvases which were big.
Yeah.
6 foot. And he would do really impressive sketch paintings and sketches, and then he'd do the actual painting. And actually the sketches are really impressive in themselves. And, part of it probably was when there was the summer show at the Royal Academy, a big painting gets noticed.
Yeah.
Because it's big.
Yeah.
It takes up a lot of the wall. Mm-hmm.
Did Turner do big ones?
Not 6-footers.
No, okay.
But it's definitely rival between the two, and there's lots of famous stories and how they influenced each other, and even Turner changing a painting at the last minute in the Royal Academy because he'd seen what Constable had done, and there's all sorts of...
Oh, that sounds good.
It's worth... The relationship between the two is definitely worth looking at. But something else with Constable. So this is, again, you could just walk past this painting, not pay too much attention, but again, it's worth a little bit more time. 1824. So 1824 is actually quite an important year for Constable because he has an exhibition in France of his landscapes. Now, forgive me, audience, I haven't done my research to know whether this was one of those paintings that he displayed there or not. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, because just as somebody like Mozart would write music in a hurry because he had a concert coming up.
Mm-hmm.
If you have been offered the chance of an exhibition of your landscapes, you've got to paint them. You've got to create them. So again, this is a painting which is high quality, but in some ways you could imagine being able to do it in a relatively short amount of time. And that exhibition was really influential on a number of French painters who themselves, there are some later paintings by those painters called the Gleaners of people picking up grain and, from a recently harvested field.
I'm going to look those up.
But not only was it influential, not only was he imitated in terms of its subject matter, but in terms of its looking at nature, looking at ordinary people in nature. And you have in particular a school that develops called the Barbizon School. Now, it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all these different names and places and schools. But the Barbizon School is worth noting. Basically, it's a number of painters operating around the town of Barbizon, small town of Barbizon. And they have a real interest in landscapes. And they are very influential on that group of painters that we now know of as the Impressionists. So again, it's another direct link. In fact, Constable was more popular in France probably than he was in Britain.
And he did get into the salon, didn't he? He did get, I think.
Did he?
Yes, I think he did.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So
he submitted to the salon too?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. 1824.
Oh, same year then.
Oh, it says yeah.
So do you know what the painting was?
No. Sorry, everybody. That was useful.
No, but it's
It'll make everyone have to look it all up. We do.
But I mean, it's again, we're used to landscapes now, but if you think what was typical subject matter, I mean, it's not like nobody had ever painted a landscape, but it was portraits, it was royalty, it was Christian, stories from the Bible. Here we have ordinary people in a landscape, nature, I think it's somewhat influenced by him trying to get his wife ill, so that sense of nature being regenerative and life-affirming and life-giving. And
totally. I think those clouds for sure. I actually wonder now we should look at all the ones he painted in Brighton, because I think they have all got stormy clouds. I wonder if he's done any in Brighton that are blue and sunny, like sunshine scenes. It would be interesting to look, because there was definitely a painting of storm clouds in the storm, I think, in Brighton. So,
well, I mean, it's fun for an artist to paint clouds, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm looking into it too much.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, of those paintings that I know, the Chain Pier is the most popular.
Oh, I love the Chain Pier. Look at that.
I mean, that's great.
So good.
It's great for us, and I recommend people have a look at it, because, if you know Brighton, you can start to recognise, Brighton of 200 years ago. There used to be this Chain Pier, obviously no longer exists, but it was, I believe, to the left of where the current Palace Pier is. And, that particular painting, he's revelling in painting the sea, which is such a difficult thing to paint. The sky, again, taking up over half of the painting.
Yes.
That particular painting, they'll just have more characters.
There's a lot more to it. It's very busy.
It's almost, it's
the Piccadilly.
It's getting a little closer to, without the fine kind of accuracy. It's getting a bit closer to, reminds me of a bit of a Canaletto. You've always got a dog in Canaletto and you've got a dog in this one.
Oh, yeah.
But he definitely, I mean, as you can imagine, I mean, he would, but he's definitely painting, he enjoys painting the sea when he's in Brighton, which I mean, it's quite understandable.
Yeah, need to look out. There must be do you know where he lived when he was in Brighton?
I don't
wonder
actually.
if there's a sign somewhere, one of those blue signs.
Well, funnily enough, it's an odd coincidence, but he lived in what is now Silwood Road.
Do you know that road?
Oh well.
Okay.
Well, no, I do. We did a walk a couple of days ago for a friend of ours who sadly passed away, and she lived on Silwood Road.
No.
Which is a slightly strange coincidence, isn't it?
That is a huge coincidence.
Yeah. So yes, so we just looked it up. So, and I'm just reading this, frankly, off a BBC website. There is a blue plaque in Brighton, and it says John Constable, RA, which means Royal Academician, 1776, 1837, lodged and worked in this house in 1824, when he painted the Gleaners, in 1828, then known as 9 Mrs. Sober's Gardens.
That's so good.
Unusual name.
It really is.
Constable made about 200 paintings and drawings during his 4 years in Brighton, where he moved to try and ease his wife Maria's TB symptoms. The house in what is now Silwood Road was then 9 Mrs. Sober's Gardens. Artists Peter Harrap and his partner Natasha Kissel now use Constable's top floor painting room as a studio. What do you know?
Oh, that's lovely.
And the plaque was unveiled by his great-great-grandson, Richard Constable. Huh.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, there we are. So we need to... Well, you've only just walked down Silwood Road. So that is so interesting. We're always saying that about all these little connections. So that is quite weird.
So it's amazing, isn't it? The little,
Yeah.
all the different little routes and alleyways and byways of a painting that can lead you in all sorts of different directions. So
the more you look at this painting, though, the more you just think, if you were walking up there with your easel, would you stop and paint the windmills from that angle? And I just think it's really interesting that he has. Most people would not. They do a full windmill or something. So I don't know, even the rooftop on the house, it is just so funny to me, this painting. I find it really unusual.
So what was going through his head that he just
stop there. I'll just do the top. I'll just do the roof of the house.
Well, of course, he could just have come walking up the path and just seen these two
people,
two women picking up the grain and just sketched it. Certainly, you've got more of a sense of the flow of the hills, haven't you?
Yeah.
And how they are, because they're partially obscuring the windmills. Then it gives you much more of a sense of the line of the ascending line of the hill. I don't think you'd have that quite so much if it was the full windmill on top.
No. I mean, the white one looks like it is certainly in the centre as well.
That's interesting, because if you go up there to take a photograph, I can't imagine that you would take a photograph like this where you missed off most of the windmill. I mean, I've been up there and taken photographs, but you get at least one entire windmill in. But that's the thing about great artists. It's their eye. It's it's not only the craft of the painting itself, it's where they put their easel. In fact, I would make the connection to a cinematographer or a photographer. I mean, you can send 100 cinematographers out into Paris tomorrow morning, but only really a couple will have that eye to see something differently and then present it in a way that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. I can tell when I'm watching a documentary, I can tell within 3 minutes whether the cinematography is going to be relatively standard or whether it's going to be special.
I agree with that.
And they're not often special, to be honest.
No. Except on your documentaries, Phil.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we don't want to hold people back from going to the website and downloading all those documentaries they can now watch for themselves. I believe Lost Temple of Java was called More Bertolucci Than Bertolucci. So there's one that people can start with. There is also, it's quite an old series, but we when we did our Great Artists series presented by Tim Marlow, they're only 22, 23 minutes long. They're all on the website too. And I remember doing the Constable episode.
Oh, that's good. It's probably full of proper facts and details.
Behave.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at seventh-art.com or contact us by emailing info@seventh-art.com. See you next time.